What's up everybody, Coach Mills here coming at you with a brand new Valorant video, and in this video we're going to be breaking down the best agent in the entire game right now with a near 100% pick rate in none other than OMEN. You see, mastery of this agent can allow you to not only fill the most vital role in any team composition, but allow you to carry and pop off in ways that no other agent can, and can easily climb you all the way to Diamond, Immortal, and beyond. But go head over to the GameLeap website right now if you want in-depth advanced OMEN VOD reviews made by our top 100 player Tanner, where he shows you step by step exactly what he does to dominate his games on OMEN. So do yourself a favor and go check that out. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now we're gonna break down OMEN's abilities one at a time and give you targeted tips on how to use his abilities for the most impact. Then we're gonna break down his role and then general tips for OMEN that you should incorporate in every single one of your games to get guaranteed value and climb. Right off the bat, we have to talk about the most dynamic ability on OMEN, and it's his Shrouded step, his short-range teleport. Now this ability is incredibly hard to hear where it ends up, and honestly, in a really proactive fight with lots of gunfighting and ability use, it is very difficult to identify in general, and where you end up is basically going to be impossible for enemies to hear. Now at its base form, you can use Shrouded step to cross from one natural cover to the next without peeking enemy fire. You can use it to cross in between your smokes to get closer to an enemy, or you could use it to bait enemies out or do things like fake teleporting through a teleporter, which is even more powerful if you send yourself and someone else where you get two teleporter noises and the other person ends up wrapping around, or you go wrap and flank. That could be something that's really powerful that is not as predictable as, oh, I'm just doing a fake teleport, because that's pretty obvious at this point. Now the next level to using something like Shrouded step to even outplaying entire enemy strategies is trying to predict what an enemy is going to do based on what you've done over and over again. Let's say a map like Ascent and you keep pushing A over and over again. Well, eventually, if you keep pushing up very aggressively, enemies will push up aggressively to challenge you, and you can systematically outplay that by teleporting on top of that little ledge right at the crossroads between A long and A ramp. Now, any enemies that are pushing up might not even be able to hear you because of all the commotion, and now that you're up there, you can easily punish them that are pushing up. This is a way to play on your predictability as a team to actually outplay the enemy by anticipating their own actions, and this is where OMEN becomes a really high game sense oriented character, because he has the tools directly to punish enemies that are pushing him with his Paranoia and getting behind or shutting down a play with his Shrouded step. Now, moving on to the next ability, his Paranoia, which he only gets one of, which is important, and this is a very powerful ability that is like paramount in the meta right now, and I'm going to go into detail about things that you should be doing with this ability later to get some free kills. However, as a general rule of thumb, using Paranoia is going to be favored among longer sight lengths, because there's certain areas on the map that are straight stretches, and Paranoia can essentially cover the entire area and give enemies very little room to actually avoid getting hit by its blinding effects. Now next up, we gotta talk about his signature ability, Dark Cover, which is his smoke, which honestly is the most powerful smoke ability in the entire game. First off, it has a 35-second cooldown, which means you can get this throughout multiple times in a game, and realistically, over the course of a round, you could fire off more than 5 smokes, which is a lot to say the least. But the thing that you need to understand about this ability is you should really utilize that time. You see, the first smoke that you throw out is essentially free, and you can use this smoke to do things like smoke the cross, so enemies don't know that you're trying to push through an alternate angle, like at the A cross when you're playing Haven attack. Or you could do something on defense like smoking mid window on Haven to either allow a duelist to push out a garage or push out a mid, or at the very least put extra pressure into the enemy and slow them down. You see, there is that time when enemies play default that work to your favor, because after that 35 seconds is up, you're gonna get another smoke so you can afford to use it. Now generally, one of the most important things that you should be doing on OMEN is using your smoke or your dark cover to relieve pressure on sides that you are actually not near. This is something that's incredibly unique to OMEN, but let's say that you're all the way on A side and an enemy is pushing at B default. By putting a smoke at the entrance where they're making contact, this puts extra pressure on the enemy, because enemies that haven't pushed through now all of a sudden have to push through blind without information, and if they do, they could get sprayed down, and there's more pressure there. And if they haven't pushed through yet, now they have to push onto point as a team completely blind. So this really puts a lot of pressure on the enemy. It slows them down, down. It gives your teammates more survivability and more ability to make plays on an enemy, and it's incredibly important for you to do this all over the place, really providing that extra bit of pressure relief to your allies from anywhere on the map. Very unique to Omen and incredibly powerful. Now, the last ability that we got to break down about Omen is his From the Shadows, and there are many different ways to use this ultimate. You could use it for information, for instance, or you could use it for planting if you want to go make a plant play from across the map, or to set up a flank play on the enemy. However, being predictable with it is the easiest way to get shut down. If you're going to make a flank play, there are several things that you need to understand. First off, you need to go someplace a little bit untraditional. Going in the obvious places are going to get you checked right away, and the idea is you set up in an area that actually costs the enemy something, and that directly leads to our second point, which is pressure. If you plan to go on a flank play, you need there to be a cost for enemies leaving their position and going to find you out. If you want to go back into the enemy spawn to try to get a couple of kills and cut off an enemy, maybe that might be the right play at the time, but if the entire enemy team can go back and check for you, kill you together, and then go back to their positions before your teammates are pushing in, then it was a very unsuccessful flank play. However, let's say your teammates are pushing A main. As they're heavily trying to engage the point, the enemy are rotating to cut them off, and then you execute a teleport. You see the difference in this scenario? Now enemies have to either go send resources to you or decide to rotate to help their team that are getting bum rushed by your team. Essentially, if you are planning on making a very risky teleporter ultimate play, you need to make sure that just the actual act of enemies coming and searching you out is worth value in itself, and hopefully you can connect on some kills to maybe even get more value. However, I would generally shy away from some of these flank play strategies, as most of the time they are far too greedy and you're just gonna get caught out and killed. Now, on top of this, as a general rule of thumb, as we see from pro play, often if you can get the plant down in a 1v2 scenario, it is often worth investing that teleport, because you got to think about a couple of things. First off, if you have the spike down and enemies have to rotate from across the map to get to you, like you know where the enemies are, you have the spike, they're nearby, you teleport across the map and you plant, not only is there more pressure on them because they have to rotate all the way over there and the clock is ticking down and they have to go pretty far. Second off, because you have that spike down, you basically have that advantage, so it is giving you the chance to win that 1v2. Third off, because you already invested your ultimate, you get an ult point for planting and you get 3,000 credits for all your teammates. So typically this is a worthwhile scenario. However, in 1v3, 1v4 scenarios, it becomes a lot less worth it. So definitely every single situation is going to be different. Now, the last tip I'm going to give you from the shadows is you can actually bait enemies by last second canceling a teleport as enemies push in. You saw this from Shinobi C9, who actually did this, where enemies were pushing into him at U-Haul. He teleported somewhere else, and at the very end, as enemies were pushing in U-Haul, they checked his angle, he canceled his teleport, popped out, and got a double kill. That was an absolutely insane play, and it's something that you should try in your games, where you essentially abuse the fact that the second you pop out a teleport, you can automatically engage in combat, which is really powerful when you're canceling it, not when you're actually teleporting across the map where you're vulnerable for a certain amount of time. Now, the next thing on Omen that we got to talk about is his primary two roles, and that's controller and lurker. First off, the controller, those roles are pretty obvious. You need to smoke sidelines and provide support on defense for control, which I talked about before. Smoking off the really long sidelines that you can't challenge, and that's going to change depending on what you have. You don't want to smoke off your own opera sideline, but if you don't have guns that can effectively fight that range, it's typically better to smoke those powerful angles. The best rule of thumb for you to understand is what is the economy of both teams and what is the effective range that you want to fight in. Let's say that the enemy team's on an eco and all of them are going to be running stingers or pistols and you have ARs. In that scenario, smoking off the longer sightlines or even heaven is not necessary because you can directly challenge these angles, and if enemies want to try to contest you from these angles, they're at a fundamental disadvantage. But if you force them or give them an avenue to get onto point using your smokes, this actually sets them up for the advantage that they want because they have weapons not in those far effective range. So that's just something to generally keep in mind. Now, the thing about Omen and the thing that makes him so much more powerful than a character like Brimstone right now is he does so much more than just his controller role, and after you accomplish your controller role, there's a lot more you can do, and this is where the lurker role comes in. Now, of course, one of the extremely powerful things that we touched on is that you can do your job as a controller from anywhere on the map. You could be lurking or cutting off rotations mid, while at the same time still smoking off the long sideline for your teammates all the way on A, which is something that's very powerful and leaves you a lot of wiggle room for impact. However, there is a certain amount of risk there to where if your team hasn't engaged fully yet and you end up dying, you're getting caught out, you can't smoke for your team, and if you're the only controller on your team, it's going to be very hard for them to execute a point. So that's just the balance that you have to find while playing Omen. Now let's talk about some some targeted Omen tips that are guaranteed to get you impact if you start to incorporate them into your games. The first thing that we learned directly from the First Strike tournament is that Paranoia is one of the most powerful team setup abilities, but you need to use it correctly, and I'm going to tell you exactly how. The first thing that you need to do is position it from through a wall and call it to your team. The idea is that you are not directly where you're gonna be paranoing from. Because you can use it through any surface, you can be hypothetically on A and use it on mid. You could be assisting from the other side of a wall. You could be all over the place and still help your team with Paranoia. And you gotta think about it this way. Have an ally that's close to a swingable angle where they can directly turn on the area that gets hit by a Paranoia. You Paranoia out, your ally swings right around the corner because they're ready for it, following behind your Paranoia, and they get to kill everyone affected and still swing them even if those people start to pull back behind natural cover, just because Paranoia lasts a really long time. Now this is going to be far more effective than trying to follow it up yourself, because it's pretty difficult to hit with Paranoia in a way that affects the entire area and then still wrap around and kill enemies in time. But if you get an ally to set up at that angle right before the pivot to swing around and follow up your Paranoia, it's going to be really easy for them to convert on their kills. Now it's really important that you get the timing right and the calling right, so I would talk with your teammate about when they should start swinging out, because ideally they're swinging out as you're casting it and they're barely not getting hit by it. That gives them the most amount of time to follow up. But of course, if you actually blind your allies while they're swinging around the corner, they're gonna die, they're gonna flame you, it's gonna be a terrible time, so definitely keep that in mind. Now the next big tip that we got for you on Omen, and we talked about it before, but I have to reiterate it here, and it's you can't afford to be first dead on Omen. A lot of Omen players are fraggers, and I get that. You play Omen, you like to frag, and you want to go in and clear sight because you have baiting duelist, right? But Omen can't afford to be killed early. You see, the thing is, his abilities actually scale later in the game, and the fact that he gets more and more uses out of his smokes the later on in the game that he lives means that he's absolutely paramount for later in the game. It is really important that you're not the first dead, you're not going in like a psychopath or making a really aggressive teleporter play right off the bat, especially if you haven't done your job to invest these smokes with these longer angles. If your team is already committing and you've already invested and created that open opportunity for allies to get onto point without getting offed in the face, then maybe you could be more aggressive as the game plays on. But you never want to be that person that peeks an angle first, gets offed, and then basically just leaves your team without a controller for the rest of the round, which basically makes it unwinnable, especially if that enemy already got that numbers advantage. Now next up, the next tip that we gotta break down for Omen as a general rule of thumb is that the Phantom is gonna be better than the Vandal for Omen, specifically because you're gonna be teleporting around, playing in and out of your smokes, and challenging people that take your smokes. Typically, enemies will look to use your smokes against you and your team. There'll be Phoenixes that pop in there to set up a flash play for his team to flash out of it. There will be other characters like Jed or even Reyna who will lurk in those smokes, preventing you from pushing through and then trying to look for an opportunity to peek out and get some kills. Having the Phantom allows you to constantly spray your smokes, checking to see if enemies are in there, allows you to make a lot more sneaky plays where you're hiding in your own smokes. It gives you more versatility on Omen in general, and it's far better for also swinging your own Paranoias than something like the Vandal. Typically on Omen in particular, the Phantom is going to be your best bet. And the last thing that you need to understand about mastering Omen is that it's going to be pretty difficult to get him right off the bat. He's a very difficult character that has a lot of abilities, and you're going to have to use them in combat, and sometimes you're just going to teleport to a place and die immediately. Don't feel discouraged if you try to play Omens and some of your plays go poorly. Eventually you'll get the hang of this agent, combining ability use with gunplay as well, and you'll get that game sense for the types of plays that you can pull off, like Paranoia and teleport, teleporting behind natural cover, using your smokes to transverse through the battlefield, and different things like that. Once you master these things, you'll get better and better, and if you need more step-by-step instruction, definitely go check out our in-depth Radiant VOD reviews on the GameLeap website and the links down below. And if you have any questions, please let us know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for coming by. I hope you learned something. That's all we got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time,